I'm Sally Treanor. Welcome. This is the series of basic watercolor technique, and we're starting on our new project, which is doing rocks. And the rocks will have various techniques attached to them that we hope that you will be able to include as you go forward in your general painting and include in other wonderful paintings that you're going to go forward with in your own inspiration. Today we're going to be using French ultramarine and burnt sienna, two colors with which you're very familiar. We're adding to that new gamboge where we need to get a green because we have to complete the triad for that purpose. But I'm going to ask you as we go forward to be thinking about other things you can use to create sorts of effects that might be very pleasing to you. With that in mind, let me just briefly go over a couple of the things that I think are important. We've been talking about how we sculpt and move paint around. And one of the things that we use is a credit card. The other one you've seen me use is this palette knife. The criteria for palette knife is that it be clean, never used for anything but watercolor, so that there's no residual oil on it, and that it be very flexible. And by flexible, I mean you should be able to get a lot of bend out of it. I have two other here. This is an old palette knife that I've had for years. And talk about flexible. This baby is almost as flexible as the credit card. And again, a tool that I find helpful. This is a little bit different. It's not very flexible and I don't care. What I like is that slanted edge on the end of it. I don't have to flex this at all, but I can take a nice big swath of color and move it around with this without any manipulating at all. The reason I sometimes like the card is because I've been using cards like this for so long that I intuitively know when to oppose more parts of the edge or use the tip to get a varying line. And as you become more familiar with this kind of painting and moving things around, I think you'll find a tool that fits your hand well, but it's worthwhile becoming familiar enough to have a tool that you prefer. This is a combination of the Lonesome tree and the rocks. So this is a little crag that's up, elevated and almost upright. It tops out and goes off into the sky. This is what we're going to do for our first exercise today. And this is the one, this is on dry paper. And there's two things to remember about this: speed and caution. If you remember when we were working on the Lonesome tree, it was important that we wait until we ended up with a surface where there was still available pigment. In other words, it was still wet enough to move around, but not so wet that it would run back into where we just scraped it away. So let's remember those lessons right now and see what we're going to do. First of all, I already have some puddles, so I will re-wet those puddles. This is another thing that you need to remember. Make sure you have puddles for every color you're pretty sure going to use, so that you don't have to stop and go into things which would interrupt the drying time as part of your focus. So I also, and here I go into the yellow first. I'm very proud of myself here. And I'm probably going to have to re-wet this because I'm not going to use it first, but I at least have my puddle of green now. I'm going to increase the volume of my puddle of burnt sienna and French ultramarine. And I will keep doing that until I get a nice, gooey, kind of viscous puddle. But let's just think about what we're going to do here. I'll just show you this again for quick reference. It's going to have a mound of, the edge of a cliff, the top of a cliff. It's going to have a tree, it's going to have some grass. When you see me dip into water, I'm not rinsing my brush. I'm just picking up more water to rehydrate my puddle usually. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about any shapes at all except for the contour. So I'm going to use a second brush. This is what's fun about having a wealth of brushes, you know, that you can use as many brushes as you want. And I'm going to just introduce this green next to the areas that are clearly rock. And I'm not going to worry about the green much more than that. Just as we have been encouraging ourselves to touch wet with wet, that's what I've done here. So the green, which is the last thing in, is invading the surface of the area that are rocks. And that's going to give me nice edges. It's going to be interesting mingling, all kinds of things that are going to happen without my having to do anything except having introduced them together. Okay, so I just dipped up some more water. I'm going to now increase the amount of pigment in my puddle. In other words, the saturation. I'm going to come back into my rocks and just kind of add areas of dark, a little more brown into it. And I'm going to repeat the exercise that I just followed and introduce the dark to the green. Some places that's going to edge out because the green has already started to dry. I'm going to keep doing this. Some places with more blue in the mix. Now I'm just barely touching the paper. I'm not sweeping it on. I'm not pushing it on. I'm just letting it flow out of my brush into the areas that I'm touching. So I'm changing from warm to cool and seeing what happens as I introduce these paints. This will give me some nice variety. Hopefully it'll help me with granulation and interesting things happening. And now we'll just go to some straight blue. And I'm not bothering to change my brush on this because there's elements of two colors. And this is following that little rule that we have, that the last color in is going to push the color that's there a little bit out of the way. If it's on dry paper, that won't happen. It only happens when the paper is wet. I want to hurry this up a little bit so that it's dry enough to do. The sheen is just leaving the paper. So what tool do we want to use? I don't know how many of you have palette knives at this point. I'm going to start with the credit card. If I bend from there, I've got a stroke this wide. If I start with the tip, I get a really narrow stroke. So I have to control the width of my stroke. I always keep a paper towel handy to get rid of the excess that I'm removing. I'm literally removing as well as moving, as well as sculpting paint. Oof, look at those beautiful rock shapes. They're gifts to me. And I'm going to make sure I have some things happening up here that suggest that tree that I'm going to add. I'm scraping across some of the green down here to give myself good edges. I've got other things I want to do to this, but right now I'm going to go ahead and design my tree. And I'm going to go back to my puddle, which has pretty much dried. So I dipped up some water. I didn't rinse my brush. And I'm just going to...
Are you considering light source at all here?
Nah.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. I'm giving myself an interesting shape. This is a windswept place. So again, the tree is going to be, it's had some bad things happen in its life. Let's spend a little time adding pigment to this new puddle. And we do want this guy to have the logic of being able to grab onto the cliff. So you have to worry about that. We'll use, I want to switch now to my palette knife. I'm going to drag some of these branchy tendrils out because they make nice shapes on the palette knife that I can't get with the brush. It's not quite ready, so let me just hit it with the hairdryer again. Now, mind you, you don't have to have a hair dryer for this exercise. I'm using it for brevity. And again, I'm going to come in now, stronger pigment, better saturation. Always remember that your tree is thickest at the bottom. So if you've got things that are happening that aren't giving you that thickness, make sure you correct that, because finally, even though we don't draw these ahead of time, drawing it plays a part. Going back to this little tool, I'm dragging out more of the roots, making things happen that way, moving paint around within the trunk, putting those branches on the other side. I think we're increasing the drama of this tree's life. Always like to add to the story. I'm just doing some score marks here that when we finally take a picture of this and put it up, you'll be able to appreciate that the score marks both are moving paint out of the way and scouring the paper so that they'll show up as lines that are darker. Okay, I'm picking up my littler brushes now. I'm going to take some quite dilute burnt sienna. Be careful with this because you don't want to have big blooms of color. And now I'm just touching the areas that are still damp and letting the burnt sienna flow into them. You can also do this later after everything is dry and re-wet gently and cause that to just flow through what's happening. Now we're going to go into the blue, sort of the same rule. You want a puddle that's just blue, and you're going to re-emphasize some of those areas that are the jagged edges of the boulders. So you're separating out what you created spontaneously with removing paint.
You know, you always touch your brush to your fabric before, and some people may miss that.
I never like to, especially in this stage of a painting, invade a piece of paper with excess water. You're always working on controlling the water that you're using, as well as the saturation of pigment in your brush. And it's really important to remember and make a habit of, after you pick up some of the pigment that you want, that you take excess water out of the brush. You're really removing water rather than pigment at that point. And it's essential so that you're the boss. You are the boss of this painting. Now, I can come back into this painting when it's completely dry and be even more aggressive with some of the things I'm doing. But even these little touches right now, while it's still wet, lends some drama to the tree, lends some warmth, some life. We know this tree now, it's not dead. I'd like to think it's not. So anytime I add some warm notions to this tree, it brings it up. So I haven't done any background. It's not that I don't feel we need a sky. It's just that we don't need it right now.
When you were using the palette knife on the tree, were you using the edge or the flat?
You can actually tell which part I'm using by the width of the. So if it's a skinny stroke, I'm using the tip. If it's a wider stroke, I'm using the edge. There's lots of stuff happening in this, and I haven't been working more than like 15, 20 minutes on it.
So you are not using the new gamboge by itself at all, only to create the green?
Right. I don't feel the need for doing anything with the yellow on the rocks. It won't give me anything. And the places where the wet green invaded the wet puddle that it was going to be becoming the rocks, what I have is kind of a mossy thing happening to the rocks from the infusion of that green. And to me, that's enough of the yellow for a painting like this.
Just one question, you painting on dry paper, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Otherwise, I'm not going to get these edges, and it would never have gotten to the point, even with the hairdryer, that I could have scraped it as early as I did. And incidentally, I quite like on the paper, you can see where there's a glow of green on the top of some of those rocks that's sort of mossy.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. That's part of what I'm trying to have happen. It's just a matter of making sure that you, again, you have to remember everything. You have to remember when to do things. You have to remember when to put that green in there. If you wait to put that green in there, you're going to have a hard edge between the green and the mass that's going to become the rock. So you have to just very smoothly keep working. So that's why I counsel you to have your puddle, that's the combination of the burnt sienna and the French ultramarine, and your puddle that's a combination between the French ultramarine and the new gamboge. And let me just reiterate, I don't usually use French ultramarine when I'm making a green because it ends up being, well, frankly, it ends up being kind of a mossy green. And it isn't always that I want a mossy green. Quite often I want a brighter green or a green that says something more about spring or fall or whenever it is in the time of year. So that's when I use cobalt instead of French ultramarine.
What size brush did you start with?
I started with, again, this is a golden fleece. It's a number 14. 14, you would be just amazed at how different the different brushes are by manufacturer. This is a nice, hefty, big brush, holds a lot of water, holds a lot of pigment, comes to a great point. It is a great workhorse brush. Also, I came in with 2 smaller brushes. Well, they're both Skoda number 8s, but they're different styles, but same great quality. That act very much like riggers. They're long enough hairs so they hold lots of water. They come to a gorgeous point, so you give a lot of control of how you drop color in and where you put it. You use different brushes for different characteristics. And I also use my riggers. Almost all my riggers are golden fleece. One of the things that I do to ensure that I'm going to have a good continuity happening as far as planes go. First, I just take one of my rounds and I generously wet the area behind the tree. And it doesn't matter if it overlaps a little bit. And I'm doing this very quickly and not terribly carefully. But one of the things I am doing is touching. And remember, this particular palette is non-staining. It means that it's going to have some bleed to it. But I don't mind because I'm going to make this kind of a stormy day.
Sally, can you come to the conclusion that staining colors don't have a bleed to them?
Yes,
Wow.
they all have a little bit of a bleed to them. It's not that you can't lift or force staining colors, but they do it less than non-staining. So in this, we used French ultramarine and we used burnt sienna. And I'm going to go ahead and just make kind of a grayish puddle. And here's why I wet the whole thing. And I'm bringing it right up to that branch. And it's not wet evenly, so I'm going to have a little bit of, but please notice that I'm working on the whole thing simultaneously. So I am sure that I'm going to get the plane represented as the sky this time. So I'm not going to get the kind of stuff that has been happening to some of you when you're not working across the whole area. So I'm going to let that bleed around. I'm not going to do too much more. I like that I used the gray. I'm not going to have to do too much more of it. I'm making use of some of that bleed that's coming off the tree. All right, I like that. And I think it enhances the piece. I'm liking it.